to this new factory experimental class that the NHRA has been very excited about, very vocal about, a lot of excitement about it. But I go, man, pro stock is so healthy right now, looking good. You got to be really careful because you don't want 2 or 3 or 4 of those guys defecting and going over to that category because it may help that one momentarily or bolster it early on, but you've hurt one of your core categories. So you make a really good point. I wonder, like Midwest Drag Racing Series 2 years ago announced the inclusion of Top Alcohol Funny Car in the 8th mile. I think there were 6 or 8 cars at the event this past weekend in Texas. And now you've got 60 plus funny cars showing up for Funny Car Chaos. And that event is not, there's a series, the Funny Car Chaos series. I mean, they race multiple events across the country. Are you at all interested in that space though? Like beyond the confines of NHRA, is it exciting for you to have other places to race potentially, or other places for your top alcohol brethren to go race on the 8th mile, being the star of the show? Because that's one of the things that I think is enticing, is that when you go to a Funny Car Chaos event, if you've got an A-Fuel funny car, you're going to be one of the stars of the show. You're the central focus of this whole event. God knows it's good for egos. It's good for all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, and I know a lot of the guys that do those series, man, they have a great time with them. As you guys say a lot of times on the show, the NHRA is still, for all intents and purposes, the big ticket item in terms of going out and racing in. But when it comes to Alcohol Funny Car, you can't think of NHRA Alcohol Funny Car right now without thinking about Sean Bellemere. And he's one of the biggest advocates for the Midwest Drag Racing Series. Him and his team just absolutely love going over there and running. And it's to the points that you mentioned. They are the premier, one of the premier classes. The fans love them. They hype the class up. They give them priority in terms of some of the times that they get to run. And that gets a lot of people excited at the NHRA races, thinking about the opportunity to be able to do so. I don't think it would ever be a mass exodus by any means. If there was ever an opportunity from a dragster side of things, it would be kind of interesting from a rules perspective, the way that went, just given that they run 8th mile, especially with the A-Fuel cars making kind of a harder charge in the top end in order to kind of close the gap on what some of the blown guys are doing. But it'd always be something I think that people would be definitely willing to entertain.
What is the draw to A-Fuel? Billy Carroll asked a great question in here. Is it more efficient, easier on parts, more mild at the hit? I mean, we've seen, again, the Top Alcohol pretty much. Are we going to change the name of Top Alcohol Dragster to Injected Nitro Dragster? I mean, we still call it that, right? But it's really gone that direction. So what is fueled that movement, and why is it preferred?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in there. One is what we mentioned earlier. It is a good stepping stone if you did ever want to go into the fuel ranks. The other, from a parts standpoint, you can find a way to be pretty hard on them if you want to, but at the same time, they do not turn the RPMs that a blown car does. So if you can really dial it in, you can be still pretty aggressive, but also have less parts attrition that kind of goes in there as far as some of the consumables are concerned. But it's also just shown to be a pretty attainable combination if you can kind of get a baseline going and then chip away from it there. So
what do those things turn going through the traps? Like what kind of RPM does
the most RPM they see is actually during the burnout? It's like 6,500.
I was going to say there's something that got turning like $4,000 at the finish line. I mean, they're doing that. So you're saying it's less exotic of a combination, would you say, as far as like needing to have this whole exotic blown program that will turn the high RPM?
Yeah, and from some of the stuff. Yeah, some of the stuff that I've talked to in terms of a few of our friends in the class that run on the blown side of things, it all comes down to the blower too. I mean, if you don't have a great blower, I mean, like top of the line blower, you cannot push to run the high teens or the low 20s that it takes to be competitive these days. And man, if you backfire those a couple times, and the expense that comes with one of those that you don't need to worry about with an A-Fuel car, that can get pretty daunting pretty quickly.
It's good information.
It's really